I'd like to apologize to everyone on the content team and protect our winners because I can overlord a little much. Because I am constantly thinking of how do we motivate the outdoor state to get out there and vote. And I really think it's the great marketing issue of our time, and that sounds kind of almost cheesy, but it's like we reach them through all forms of media that are out there. And how do you communicate climate change and not just have it be this doom and gloom thing? And that's where it's great to see all these content creators here make it fun. I love this shirt, for example, part of this vast conspiracy theory to make clean air, clean water, and a healthy planet. So that's just an example of like flipping it on its head and not just like doom and gloom storytelling. So really excited for all these content creators here, and the Stoke Fest that you saw last night, we just started help funding climate projects. As a filmmaker myself, the biggest challenge is to get funding for these things, because it's like we're pretty good at going, hey, we want to go climb a line that's never been written and make a short film on it, and we can get sponsors for that. When it's like, hey, we want to dive into the teeth of climate change and why it's we're struggling and why climate deniers are winning at the polls, those emails don't get returned. So I think it's really good and a huge opportunity for all you creators that we want to fund real deal storytelling around climate. And at POW, we're just getting started on that. We'll get better on our end, executive producing this stuff and overseeing, and that's where we need to win, because quite frankly, that's where our opponents are winning. And I touched on it briefly, but it's like, Exxon alone spent $100 million on marketing to climate deniers last year. So it's we're up against a huge, this behemoth. So we got to do it through gritty storytelling, and that's who we got on this panel today.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm going to bring up Amanda. Thank you, Jeremy. I'm going to bring up Amanda now. Amanda's going to moderate our panel. Very apt that you are here as a self-proclaimed fire nerd. Is it okay to say it? Yeah?
Yeah, I would say so.
Absolutely.
Self-identified fire nerd, I would say that.
So we're excited to have Amanda. She's part of our Creative Alliance. She hosts a podcast called Life with Fire. You guys should listen to. She just had an episode with Cody that dropped last night or 2 nights ago, right?
Yep.
Awesome.
Came up with a good excuse to talk to Cody for my fire podcast.
Perfect. So I'll let you bring up the panelists and introduce them as we go. Thank you, guys.
All
right. Hi, everybody. First up, we've got Brendan Leonard, who is a writer and a filmmaker and, of course, the creator of Semirad. Sarah Steele. Where's Sarah? Yeah, you guys can clap as they come. Oh, that's some hype. Yeah, Sarah is the program lead for YouTube's Human Rights, Racial Justice, and Equity, and she is she's also on the POW Advisory Board. And Max Romy, come on up. Max is
Nobody.
Max
is almost gone.
You guys all know Max, I'm sure, but he self-identifies as someone who finds the most difficult places to paint, is what he was telling me earlier. Awesome. And then we have Jules Jimravat, and she is a climber, a photographer, and a filmmaker. So we're going to talk for about 45 minutes to an hour, if I can push it. I asked Brian about that earlier, and he said sure. So if we are continuing to chat after 45 minutes, we can just keep it rolling, and then we're going to break out we're going to go into breakout sessions and just kind of chat about what ideas you have and see if we can help you guys refine those ideas and kind of build them out, and hopefully leave you with some things that you can do once you leave the summit. So to start out, I kind of introduced you guys, but I'm really interested to hear what stories are you telling right now? A climate related preferably, but if anybody wants to, what I'm kind of thinking here is we can just kind of chat. It doesn't have to be sort of a specific person, so if you have something top of mind, you can just go ahead and answer, and then we can kind of move into a more conversational tone. So yeah, what stories are we telling right now?
No stories.
He's painting the room in case you don't know what's happening.
We'll see. I don't know right now.
Make a drawing.
I'm currently drawing some little graphics in my little notebook here of different ways to view a ballot, like not with candidates on them, but like one of them just says, "Do I give a fuck? Choose two," and it's where the bubbles where the candidates would be, just says yes, 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 yes. Things like that. I'm just trying to like think of how to get people, how to poke them a little bit through social media and get them to be like, yeah, I should actually do that, you know. And then I've been working on a film called The Seven Summits of My Neighborhood, which is not specifically a climate change film, but it's kind of like sort of the opening scene is me calling my mom and asking her if she has $150,000 so I can go climb the 7 summits. And of course she's like, "Go fuck yourself." She didn't say that, but so instead, basically, I go climb all these peaks that I can see from my house under human power, which are not that impressive, as you know, Nate. But just sort of a goofy little film, sort of encouraging people to do adventures close to their home, but also think up your own stuff as opposed to just looking at somebody's Instagram and saying, "I got to go do that too, because if I go there, it'll make me happy." But that's off the top of my head. I think that's it. Yeah. Oh, I wrote an essay for Outside called "A Pessimist Plants a Tree." Oh, thanks. I sent it to a friend last year, and he decided to not publish it because he thought it was a little dark, and a bunch of things happened, and we had a baby, which is a whole climate mindfuck. But it was about planting trees and forest fires and stuff like that, and it's really long, so it's not for the average American attention span, but that's what it worked out.
Hi friends. I actually wear 2 hats. I work at YouTube on racial justice and human rights, and then I run a female-driven production company. And we've been focused on local stories, actually similar vein as you. We just did 3 pieces for Arc'teryx on these badass female climbers in Squamish. And it's kind of these unsung heroes, and I'll talk a bit more about this, but I really focused on production practices and practices as a business. So we do tell climate stories, but also we just hold ourselves to high standards, and we hold our clients accountable to high standards. So I'll talk a bit more about that side of it afterwards.
Curious about that. I am going to be a father in November, which is like, it's like a parenting deal. No questions, Jules. Yeah. And so I think for the last year has been really on my mind, but I'm mostly trying to make stories that I wish that I could have seen as a kid. And so I grew up really dyslexic, and so for me it's always been like, I never liked the ones that are like all words, and so that's going to be my focus probably here on out, is like making stories I wish I had back then, maybe for the little one now. And so one of them is, I don't know if it's like this week or this decade, I'll start one of those, but my grandmother's an amazing watercolor artist, better than I'll ever be. She died 10 years ago of dementia, but she painted a lot in Alaska. So I've got her sketchbooks of all these paintings from 35 years ago of places that no longer exist. I feel like there's something kind of cool there, but I'm not quite sure how to dig into it. Sometimes a little too close to the heart, so we'll see. We'll see how those all end up. That's front of mind though.
Hi everybody, I'm Jules. Sounds like at a very different stage in my life than the rest of you. I'm not having any kids. So maybe my life is a little bit less organized and put together than the rest of these folks. But I am really interested in water policy and water management. I have been for a long time. And so a project that I'm working on right now, which is a personal project, which right now means that I don't have any money for it, so it's kind of like back burner, front burner, dabble here, get a job there. But I am trying to start in my community, which is Bend, Oregon, and tell stories about the watershed there with the goal of educating people on, where does our water come from, how is it managed, and kind of asking bigger questions about what is our cultural view of water and how might we change that view. So I spent sometimes talking to stakeholders, like ranchers, farmers, nonprofits, policymakers, and then going home and thinking. And that's where I'm at in that process right now.
Okay, I'm sorry, this might be a little bit of a heavy question, but I think it was one of the ones that I'm most excited to ask you guys, and it's, we're talking about these really heavy topics that can be really intimidating to research and to feel like an authority on, and also weaving creativity into that is, that's the basis of science communication ultimately. So I'm curious how you guys sort of, come into these topics and maybe feel that sense of imposter syndrome and then kind of overcome that, and then how you can frame that into this authenticity that really drives kind of what you guys are doing. So ultimately, like, how are you overcoming the potential imposter syndrome of writing or discussing these big topics? Any of you have an answer right off the bat here?
My number one rule is I can make fun of us, but I cannot make fun of them when I put something out there, because I don't want to be like the worst part of anybody's day, and I also fucking hate it when people argue in the comments of whatever. I just don't want to start arguments. I don't want to spend my time arguing on the internet with people who disagree with me, because I don't think you ever gain any ground. You're both just yelling fuck you at each other, and then but voting, I think, is a really easy one for me, because I believe all human beings, including myself, are lazy in some way, and it's sort of like this. How do you remind people to get off their ass and do something that's actually really easy? Voting is probably easier for most people than regular flossing. I would guess. I'm talking to my dentist anyway, I think. And starting there is like, if I do something and I am lazy in this way, maybe other people will feel the same way, and just kind of thinking about that and what you see out there, and like, is this true for everybody or just me? Because I always try to relate to people, try to think of if it's true for me, it might be true for other people. Whether it's like how we operate the toaster at my house, and like put toast down twice instead of just turning the knob to like, why do you do that? And like, maybe other people do too, and it doesn't have to be like a 100% rate, but if you can catch a few people who are like, yeah, that's me too, they feel good about that. And then I for a long time focused on like Instagram, like how many people liked my thing, but then later you could see how many people shared it, and that was the really cool thing, because then you knew somebody was like, Bob, this thing made me think of you, and send it to their friend Bob, and you don't get to see it, but there's probably a little discussion between these two people, and you're sort of this connection point between two people, in a small way, in my experience. I don't know if that actually answers the question, but did I give everybody enough time to think while I was glad? Yeah.
Is that cool? Do you get this one?
I just want to start by saying that this is my first event with POW, or first time, being with the group. And so I'm just feeling really inspired by all of you guys, and like super excited to like work together more. And so I think that my answer to the question about imposter syndrome is like other people and like the community that we have, and then thinking about like the community that I have at home. And we're all imperfect advocates, and so yeah, I think having faith in other people and in the group, and like, feeling like we're doing this together is my answer to that.
Anybody here feel like actually no, hold on, it's easy. Anybody here an expert, like a total expert in something? Great. Okay, so we're all we got one. Good. Perfect. There we go. The confidence is real. But I feel like at some level, like we're all imposters. I mean, I came in here kind of thinking I was like, ooh, I'm gonna go teach a watercolor class and it's gonna be great. And then I found out I'm not even the best painter here. It's brutal. But at some level, there's this really cool mix of everything where I'm not the best painter here. I'm definitely not the best filmmaker. I'm not even the only Alaskan, but I'm the only Alaskan filmmaker painter. So you could be an imposter in one thing, but you're rarely an imposter in all of them. And so if you're ever worried about, going into something, if you work in water and, there's like other fancy PhDs around something, just like add 2 more pieces to that Venn diagram and you are one of one. So it's really, really easy to get an expert in your field really quickly. And so I think, I'll talk more about that probably in breakout, but I think that's something that the world needs your voice because there's only one of it. And if you don't believe me, come find me later and we'll break your Venn diagram down, we'll add a few more circles, and you'll see just how special you are.
So, I started working at Google 11 years ago, which is kind of scary. And imposter syndrome is a huge thing in that company. And I remember my first week, I was sitting next to this engineer, and I was like, hey, so how'd you get here? And I was all super young and peppy, and he's like, I invented the thing that became iTunes, and I sold it to Apple. And I was like, what the fuck am I doing here? Surrounded by these people that invent these crazy tools. And it took me a long time to understand my value in that space. And I think the biggest thing I've learned that I have taken into the production world is that teams are like 1 + 1 = 3, kind of piggybacking on what you said. And a lot of what we do in our production practice is nothing about us without us. If you're gonna make a film targeting conservatives, get the conservative on your team and get them to help you craft the message. If you're making a program for Black people, have Black people on your team. Don't be making decisions without them. And this is a really hard learning curve for big companies and small companies. But I have seen huge just strides in this space. You doing okay? You gonna watercolor?
I told you I'm not the best at this.
You're knock the mic and just being okay. You gonna teach us how to change diapers on stage? That's what's next. But anyway, that's just something to just a philosophy to try to integrate in what you do is don't have imposter syndrome. Just have the badasses with you on the front lines, and then you'll bring your own addition to what you're doing. But I think that's been my biggest lesson, and it has not failed to date. I'm gonna steal the mic.
Alright, thank you guys. Just starting out with a heavy one for you. So I'm curious if you guys have any front of mind projects that have been really successful in the climate space, especially whether that was engaging an audience that maybe was formerly sort of disengaged, or maybe even getting a DM from somebody that was like, hey, this really turned me on to a topic I hadn't considered, or something to that effect. I'd love to hear about it.
Can you just ask us to humble brag?
Please brag. I know all of you can, or I know all of you have things that are brag-worthy, so.
I feel like I should have sat over there, so
I know, I'm sorry, you're the first every time.
I actually came here because I need to do more about climate, and I'm just more here to learn and everything. But I did this chart 4 years ago that it's just a timeline of, oh, there it is. And it was funny at the time, and it became this thing. If I had a nickel for every time this got shared, I would not have to work anymore. And it sounds that does sound like a humble brag, but it just kind of ran away, and it doesn't really come back to me much. But it's kind of gone all over, and it's changed meaning in the last 4 years. It was more of a warning at the time, and now it's really, I get tagged on Twitter sometimes or Instagram, and it's people being very doom and gloom, and I kind of wish it would go away. That's probably the biggest piece of art I've ever done as far as how far it's reached. But it hasn't done anything for me personally, but I hope it's done something for. It's been parodied by people will I think Breitbart did a thing where they wrote over my words. This one's translated into a few languages. People who are climate deniers will take it and change all the words, and so it's been really interesting to see how that moves through the internet and our consciousness, and how it's changed meaning for me over time. But that's kind of the number one thing I can point at, I guess. Again, I'm just stalling for you guys, so.
Yeah. Let's leave them. And then
I'll go something.
this is the.
Um, I'm like torn how to answer this question. I guess I'll start. I want to talk about art, but I also want to talk about like scientific communication and storytelling. So I think I'm going to go that way right now, and then hopefully talk about art later. I had a podcast quite a few years ago that was about Great Salt Lake, and a lot of you I've found are from Salt Lake City, and so are familiar with the lake, which is a super unique in that it's a terminal basin, so water only leaves through evaporation, and it's connected to a greater watershed that is also unique and very impacted by the local cities and the policy in Utah. And so the purpose of this podcast was to kind of communicate a bunch of scientific knowledge and research, ecological, geological, economic, to a greater audience. And the way that we found to do that was through storytelling, which it seems like it's been like a common theme through the last few days. So I don't want to like, well, I'm imagining myself like the last hammer on the nail here with storytelling, because I'm a super strong believer in storytelling, and the way that we found to communicate all this complex information was through narrative. And ideally, you have a character that can carry that narrative for you. But psychologists have told us, or they've told me, I'm not a psychologist, but they've told me that we are so much better at retaining information when it's given to us in story format. And there's so many amazing examples through history of stories being a means of communication over very long periods of time. And so I forget what the question was now, so hopefully I answered that. But storytelling is awesome and important, and I would encourage you all to think about your own ways of telling stories.
More stalling, yeah.
Yeah, I just would. You can keep. Yeah. I think a lot about stories and how they work and how when we make a film, like, could it be half as long? Could we cut things out of it? And like, this is like memes are a story in a way. Like, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be a multi-episode podcast. You don't have to take this big leap. It can be. I just speak in words because that's my first thing. I'm like in awe of people who can speak through a guitar or paint. Or photography doesn't come naturally to me, but these are all stories, and whatever your medium is, like, that's most effective in getting them out there, that's what you should do, and like, we're all telling a story in some way. It can be, there's a very famous, I guess sort of trend, but it's called 6-word memoirs, and it's, if anybody's ever heard of it, it's the most famous one is Ernest Hemingway's, that's 2 more, but I'm not going to say it, but people will try to write a memoir in 6 words, and some people can really nail it, and some, so go ahead. Oh, yeah, I made that, speaking of words, but like, that's a story too, right? Like, what is the story? And it's like, well, people believe that we're trying to save the planet because there's some sort of George Soros funded blah, 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 vast conspiracy. And I was like, well, let's just do a little take on that. Like, what is the worst case if this vast conspiracy actually exists and like is, oh fuck, we got clean water. This is bullshit. But it's all stories. That's how we've gone throughout time. Is that enough time, Max?
Oh, no, I would need more time.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to raise is there are many mediums of storytelling, and some fit better for some messages than others. And it's been interesting watching like video go from long form to short form. Like Gen Z's all psyched on TikTok. I don't personally love TikTok, but like a lot of people really like it. So what are you trying to get across and to whom? Years ago, I worked on a project with the U.S. Geological Survey. I was working on virtual reality at the time. And we went and captured these king tides in Los Angeles, which the tides get really, really high. And we compiled this video to show coastal communities what their coastline was going to look like in 50 years if climate change kept up. And that was really impactful because we brought it to schools. So we brought it to a younger audience and we took a scientific angle and we used an immersive format. VR is expensive, right? It's not a fit for everything. But I think there's other ways of showing up in storytelling that are extremely different. Does anyone know Molly Armamino here? Yeah, shout out to Molly. So Molly's a South Lake Tahoe skier, and she single-handedly brought 250 people to city council for a Clean Air Act, like by herself. And that's the kind of story that I was like, we should be doing more on people like Molly because they move things. She got the whole ski community to mobilize in South Lake. So I think it's just like, don't get stuck in your medium. Just like think of like who you're trying to reach and how you're trying to reach them, and constantly shift. Like test, fail, reiterate. That's another techie buzzword term.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Tattoo that there.
Yeah.
Okay, stories of magic. Anybody here not know that yet? Like, everybody here a storyteller? Yeah? Can we agree that? Cool. Like, raise your hands. Storytellers here? Okay, so I'm seeing like 6 liars then. Get those hands up. So, stories are like crazy, and I guess the best example I could do is like myself. So, grew up dyslexic, words suck. I wanted to be a writer, it did not work well. Like, people just, you should see my like initial stories. It was like the red lines, like you think it was just red font, like under, everything was misspelled. But I could sketch, and I kind of took refuge in that, and I could run, I loved to be outside. So I kind of like soaked it all up, but I wanted to get out there. I wanted to be like one of those people on like the GoPro, story. I want to be the expert, getting out there, doing like the crazy thing as like the Olympic athlete, the cool thing, I like featured out there, but then went to college, got injured, just, everything that I thought I could do kind of got taken away at some level, but then stories brought it all back. And so here's an example of, I dreamed of being, one of those GoPro athletes, getting out there, and what I wanted to like get GoPro to post a voting video. GoPro has 19.4 million followers. They are not political. They're not interested in being political. And so I was like, hey GoPro, let's get political and make a GoPro, like a voting video. I don't work for them. I just like reached out to one friend who kind of works there, and she's like, wow, good luck. So I said, what if I can tell you a story that is not political, that's all with the GoPro, that's about voting? She's like, yeah, sure, go for it, whatever. We could pay you $1,000. So in 1 week, I spent $6,000, and I made them a video, and I got it to them just before the 2020 election, and they posted it to their 19.6 million followers. They got a lot of heat, which is kind of fun. But it was all because of storytelling. I wasn't the best athlete, I wasn't the fastest person. I was a person with a sketchbook, and an idea, and a story. And because of that, I was able to do things that I'd only dreamed about earlier on. I got onto GoPro. I wasn't the fastest, I wasn't the best, but the story is what got it there. It's 55 seconds of glory here if you want to check it out. I don't know if the sound with it yet. No sound? Okay, no sound. Let's just describe it, like cool music sounds. But yeah, so basically this is shot in Alaska in the course of about a week and a half, edited in the other half of that week, that second week. I don't tear up sketchbooks lightly. This is the most carbon-intensive sketch I've ever made. You are an expert in something, and your story is super valuable. So whether or not you think that your story could change the world, like your story could still change your world. And I'm not the best painter in this room, I'm not the best filmmaker, but I could kind of combine all of those and make something super unique. And I think that's what I see, a room full of people with all of these amazing kind of connections. I think those connections mixed with the story will be able to reach people we couldn't imagine. And we have all the stats on Earth. Like, there's just so much data out there. What there's not is those really important personal stories that kind of connect that all. And I think that you really can't change, one story can't change the world, but your story could change your world. And if we can all change our world, then we do change the world, if it makes sense.
Yeah, you live with words, if you ask me.
Thank you guys. touched on this to some extent in what you were just talking about, but I feel like this topic and this conversation can feel really amorphous if it's not rooted in human stories and in humanizing these topics. So I'm just curious, maybe Sarah would be interested in starting this one out, but I'm curious why it's important or what the importance of, and again, I think we all know the answer to this, but in your own perspective, what's the importance of bringing more diverse voices to the table and ensuring that we're giving platforms to folks that can really humanize and we can maybe introduce them to this world and humanize these stories in a more effective way, I guess.
Yeah, lots of thoughts on that. So I think you all saw Danny's film Outlier last night. We helped produce that. But part of what we were trying to do with films like that, for example, is we brought in, it was a primarily female crew, I would say. We brought in a Latina editor. We brought in people that could relate to the story that was being told. Because very often you see this disconnect between who's in front of the camera, who's behind it, who's telling the story, who's making the choices, and it actually has implications down the line. I'll give you a really bad example that you should probably take off the record, but back at YouTube in 2020 when George Floyd was murdered, we were like, yeah, racial justice, like that's it, we're all in, let's do something about this. And they kicked off this $100 million fund called the Black Voices Fund, and they had a first meeting on the Black Voices Fund, and everyone in the room was white. And I was like, does anyone else see a problem with this? Like, you guys have, like, I'm not from that community, nobody was. And so it's just to show you, like, it's deeply rooted to not think about this stuff, and yet it impacts things down the line. Like, how are you gonna make content for a Black audience if you're not from that community? You just can't do that. And so I think, to me, the importance is, especially as we go out with climate messaging, like, you will not be taken seriously by people who can't relate to you because they just don't see themselves in your work. And so that's become more important for big companies and small, but that's where, we're all used to working with the same people we're used to working with, and it takes a little bit of extra work, but I think down the line it pays off. We are working on a documentary about a climber named Jamie Logan. Jamie is trans and transitioned quite late in her life. And we brought in trans DP and folk on the crew, and thank goodness, because I can't relate to Jamie's experience. And we were able to have an interview that was much more profound because we had someone there that she felt comfortable speaking with. So I think, I know I'm hammering home like the same message, but that moment that you're like putting that story together and you're like, who's my audience and what am I trying to say? Just stop yourself and be like, is the right person in the room giving input? And truth is, they probably aren't, and that's okay, and you're gonna have to go out and find them. And they're there. It just takes a little bit of extra work. So, anyways, I sound like a broken record, but
No, that was awesome.
yeah. I know Jules has put some thought into this. I don't know if you want to say anything. Not to call you out.
That's okay. I got really into listening to what you were saying and I forgot the question.
Just how can we bring more diverse voices to the table to really humanize this topic and ensure that that we have a diverse range of creatives and talent involved in our projects?
Yeah. So what Sarah said was amazing. I think, and I'm very early in my career, and seems like much younger than the rest of the people that I'm up here with. So talk about imposter syndrome. But I try really hard to pass the baton back down to people that I know look up to me. And I've gotten so much help from peers and people further along in their career and in their expression, whatever that medium might be. And so I try really hard to look back down and I know there's people that look up to me, and why don't I reach out to them and see what they're thinking, what they want to make, and how can I help them and give them resources and connect them with the people that they need to be connected with.
As a cisgender white man, let me talk about diversity here. I think, obviously, I think you're nailed. Keep on hitting that nail on the head. I think that's really important, and I think there is something to be said as well about that. Those stories are important, and if you aren't connected there, that's not necessarily your place to tell. And I live in Alaska, and there's a lot of extractionary storytelling up there. So a lot of people come to Alaska and they kind of take the low-hanging fruit. So like, oh, Alaska, I've heard about Anwar, I've heard about bears, I've heard about North Slope, and I'm just gonna come here and I'm gonna find myself an Alaska Native, and I'm gonna get their story, and I'm gonna go back with it, and then I'm gonna tell that. And I don't tell stories about Anwar unless I'm invited. And that doesn't mean that that's not still a very important topic, but my story and my ability to tell a story is still important, but I should stick a little closer to home. Because there's people whose home is Anwar, and they're the ones who can tell that story and should tell that story, and when they want help, they'll ask for help, and then I'm happy to do that. But I can talk about a lot of things in Alaska that are very personal, but also you don't need to come to Alaska to talk about climate change. The crazy thing about this is it is literally everywhere here. So when it comes to diversity, it doesn't mean that your voice isn't important, and highlighting diverse voices is super important, but I know a lot of cisgender white filmmakers who kind of like, they realize diversity is important and they try to tell, like how do I phrase that? They try to go out and kind of extract those stories, and that's not always helpful. In fact, it could be like very unhelpful, but that's not to say that they could have told their own story that would have been really important as well. And I think it's like, I don't want to talk feminism, but I could talk toxic masculinity. And I think that's where I should, right? As a cisgender white male, I think that's where I'm going to put my energy into, instead of like trying to tell a story about like powerful women doing awesome things. There's powerful women doing awesome things. We're going to tell those stories, but there's room for all of it.
As a cisgender white man, it is hard work to. I mean, it's obviously it benefits all of us to bring diverse voices in. I think of this drawing I will never do, but I have thought of. It's called White Nationalist Restaurant Menu, and it's just like everything is crossed out, like. Because I think about these people and I'm like, what the fuck do you eat if you're so like white supremacist? Like all your food. White people are okay, but like. I don't want the flag for it. Yeah, like what do we do? Like, did you ever hear anybody go, let's go to that new British restaurant? It's just obvious to me. I don't know. Sorry.
Thank you guys. That was super insightful. All right, our last question is just obviously avoiding the doom and gloom is pretty critical, and actually engaging your audience and not making them feel bad and or doom scroll. So what keeps you sort of feeling positive about these heavy subjects? Maybe what brings a sense of optimism? Two-part question here. And then also, how do you inspire legitimate action? I think that those two things are almost synonymous. In order to inspire legitimate action, you have to have that sense of optimism and that sense of positivity. So, what do you guys think about when you're creating content in that way? I guess. Anybody can.
Let's do it. Break the mold.
I have a background in biology and chemistry with quite a bit of evolutionary science and paleontology. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about big time and life's complexity and diversity and beauty and resilience through many mass extinctions. And I get really bummed a lot of the time when I'm seeing like how many of the places that we love that are so beautiful now being destroyed. And so I'm oftentimes like taking a step back and thinking about, the laws of nature that have persisted and will persist and are so inspiring and beautiful. And that helps me, but I don't think it's an excuse for business as usual mindset. And I think that we have a responsibility to make ethical changes to population level energy consumption. And I say population level because I don't believe in the trope of consumer driven change. I think it's really important that we're thinking at the system level with this type of stuff. But I'm very inspired by nature and nature's beauty, and maybe if Lindsay can pull up some of my slides now, I think that that's reflected in my work as a photographer, because I like to imagine that my viewer of my photos is nature itself. So maybe it's like through the eyes of a bird on a tree or an insect in the flowers. And I think humans are amazing, and we have all this great culture and art, and we can engineer the earth to our will. But I like to imagine that rather than humans viewing my photos, it is actually nature itself.
Okay, climate anxiety with storytelling is super real. I'll be totally honest, I skip through a lot of climate stories. So it's nothing personal, but if like something on the news comes up, it's like, climate change in the news, just nope, gone, just skip through it. So at some level I'm trying to make the stories that are interesting enough that I wouldn't skip, I guess, like, and that has to make them really funny. But there's a ton of hope for climate stories because like huge problems require huge solutions, and that's like some awesome story stuff. I mean, think about it, like, our generation is gonna see more change in the next, 50 years than we have in the last 5,000. That's crazy. Like, that's really crazy stuff. And we're kind of the last bridge where our parents' generation kind of could like ignore it, and our kids' generation will know nothing but it. So we kind of are this like wild spot where your perspective is unique at this level that is like unprecedented. And so the stories that you'll be able to tell are epic. And to kind of think like, let's say, I'm not gonna shit on Everest too hard here, but like Denali versus Everest, right? So you got like, Denali is a, what, 29,000? Exactly, yeah. And then, yeah, super big, and then Denali, not quite as big. Denali's the best because it's in Alaska, nothing personal to Everest. But like everybody's like Everest. But Everest starts at 16,000 or something like that? 17,000? Yeah, and Denali starts at sea level, basically. So when you talk about prominence, like Denali's way taller than Everest, like 0 to 20,000 feet versus like 16 to 30, I think, if I'm getting that math right. This is the wrong example for this crowd. I mean, yeah. Oops. But basically, there's a lot more prominence in Denali because we started lower. And so when it comes to stories, and think about that, your story, we're talking like biggest issue we've seen since like the Pleistocene or something. And you get to start at the bottom, which means that like the heights you can reach with your story, or like where we could go, is epic. It's a little bit like saying like this is great to be like 10 to 15 points down at the start of a football game, but like it's cool because if you come back from that, this is gonna be like the craziest story you've ever told ever. We're just in the scary part right now, and it all kind of comes together at that last little bit. But if you can pull this off, like the stories you'll be able to tell are cooler than any stories that will ever be told like throughout history, because the opponent you're up against is enormous. So I'm super excited for you all, even though it's wildly depressing.
I'm going to offer a different perspective that goes a little bit against the grain of, the fact that we've talked about individual carbon footprint not being that impactful compared to other things. But if any of you know my husband, Timmy O'Neill, he's like a diehard dirtbag. And one thing he's taught me over the years that used to drive me kind of nuts when we first got together is he has this level of integrity around certain things that he never budges on. And one of those is he hates takeout containers. He hates fucking to-go coffee cups. And he will sit through a 12-hour flight and not have a single drink because he doesn't want to waste a plastic cup. And at first I was like, Jesus, dude, like this is kind of intense. Like he's doing this all the time. But over the years, I've come to appreciate it so much that in our business practices as a production company, we've come to a point where we don't bank with banks that support fossil fuels. We've come down and looked at who we bank with. We don't work for companies whose values we don't align with. We hire local crews. Like, I don't fly directors in internationally unless I have to. And so we don't have single-use plastics on set. Like, we have these practices that are small, but they hold our integrity as a company. And so we don't always have the luxury of telling climate change stories. When we do, it's amazing. Unfortunately, you gotta, make money and take commercial work and do certain things. But where we have the luxury of holding our integrity, we do. And so that has sort of been my kind of through line in the professional thinking that we have, and I would encourage you all to do that where you can. It's not always a possibility, but that and also just bringing in those storytellers who are going to have that lens. There's a photographer that Jules and I both know named Tara Kurtzner, and Tara was brought in to shoot on the Navajo reservation during the height of COVID times. And they had brought in this other photographer from the New York Times, and he was like, oh, look at the poor indigenous people, doom and gloom, like, here they are getting hit by another pandemic. And Tara was like, I see resilience, I see community, I see these people fucking holding out and protecting themselves, and that's where the lens matters. Like, don't ever forget that, because she came in with a perspective that he didn't have, because he just doesn't come from that community, so he didn't really know. So those are the two things that I'll add.
Positivity, basically. Yeah, I'm not a naturally positive person, but it's like lifting weights for me to do it, and I love it. And sometimes I think, like, oh God, is this really the time for jokes? And my grandmother died in 2016, and I was literally holding her hand as she died in the hospital room, and she had 7 kids, all Irish, full-blooded Irish, and the amount of goofiness in the room with my aunts and uncles and my mom, I was like, this is fucking inappropriate. Like, I can't believe these people are laughing at a time like this. And then I thought, of course we should, like, we don't know how, like, individually we don't know how long we have, collectively as a species we don't know how long we have, but I guarantee you nobody wants to sit next to the fucking guy, like, who's been going, I told you this was gonna happen for like 40 years, And so I don't know, maybe I got 40 years left, and I'm probably gonna be cracking jokes till they like close the casket. And like, I think it's so beneficial to be able to harness a little bit of humor, and like, people, as we talked about yesterday in the panels, people don't want to hear this doom and gloom shit. And like, yeah, it can help motivate you a little bit, but we have to figure out better ways to be like, look, you can do something, because like, you don't want to just spiral down into the drain and be like, okay, well, fuck it, I give up, like, that's the American way, or whatever.
That should be the next shirt.
I mean, really, like, when people say stuff like that, I'm like, oh, really? That's what, okay, yeah, we've always done that, haven't we? Right, yeah. So yeah, I don't know, it's just a practice for me to, like, shut that part of my brain off and go, like, well, what would somebody I would like to hang out with say instead? And, like, because I don't want to be that Debbie Downer, sort of person. I feel like I'm really inarticulately ending this now, so.
No, wait, I've got an example.
Yeah, go ahead, Max.
No, I think, like,
You're totally nailing it. Like, anybody here eat raw spinach? Oh, okay. Actually, this is the worst group. Sorry. What am I doing? Like, I gotta like recalibrate all. Okay. Anyway, I don't do raw spinach, but like, I'll put it in a smoothie because it's delicious that way. And I kind of feel like that's climate change talk, right? Like, you gotta figure out a way to hide the spinach, whether it's in a smoothie or not. This is a different group. You should eat it straight up. But like, that's probably why you're here. But like, for the rest of us, you gotta figure out a way to hide that. And it's totally fine. It'll still get in there, but like, whether it's like salad dressing or something, you just gotta figure out a way to get kids to eat the spinach. Because they gotta get the strong muscles, whether it's a smoothie or anything else. And you all got great ways to do that. Like, humor is probably the sweetest, best one, but you can do it with like art, you can do it with, location, locality, who people are. It's all just hiding spinach is what we're doing here. And you've all got some like clever tactics. It's not carrots. Don't get them to eat the carrots. Get them to eat the spinach.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that was my last question, and that was awesome. I appreciate it. Do you guys have any questions for the panel? Anybody? Over here?
Yeah, amazing creativity up here on awe. I'd love you to talk about where the ideas come from. Just a little bit about your process. And I'm sure you each have unique ways, but as storytellers, I think it's starting is always the most difficult part.
Anybody in particular?
I would say I teach a writing workshop every year, and I think the biggest problem most people have where they're like just giving themselves permission to try. And that's with anything, like rock climbing, whatever, running, something like that. Like, oh, I'm not one of those people who are special and are an artist or a writer. And like, more and more I think my creative process is fuck around and find out and like try things. And like, generally, unless you're really trying to hurt somebody's feelings, if you put stuff out there, the most people will either greet it, they'll embrace it, or they'll be ambivalent about it and just skip to the next thing. So I think that's given me like a democratization of media where we all have our own channel and you can just try things and like, well, that didn't work. I guess I'll try again tomorrow or whatever. But where ideas come from, I think another thing I think about is people always think, oh, if I just had this cabin in the woods, I would go write the great American novel for, I just need a month at a cabin. And it's like, nobody does that shit. What you need to do is create stillness in your life, which for me a lot of times is leaving my phone at home, just going for a run for an hour or 2 hours or whatever, or taking it with me and having it on airplane mode, and I'll just be bouncing around, not talking to anybody, like shuffling, and have the idea and just type a note into my phone, and sometimes it's just a lightning strike of genius, and most of the time it's fucking garbage though, and I get home and I'm like, why would that doesn't work at all, or it's a part of an idea where like you could think about it some more, but most of us I think need more stillness in our lives, and that's why running works for me, other people with cycling or whatever, but just get out and get away from all these notifications and like people pinging you and you distracting yourself with 17 open tabs in your browser and whatever. So that's worked for me. I don't really have a process per se, but maybe somebody up here does. So I don't.
That's a problem.
No. Yeah, creative process.
I totally agree with that. I find that like my best ideas come while I'm like driving on a long road trip. And so I like have Siri on, so I can just be like, Siri, write this note for me. And like, yeah, sometimes it's total garbage. And sometimes I'm like, wow, that was cool. But I think like to distill that down a little bit, like for me, being creative takes a lot of time, like sitting around and doing absolutely nothing. And that's what my significant other would probably say. He's like, you wasted the whole day. But no, what I'm really doing is I'm thinking and I'm like processing all this stimulus that I'm getting all the time. And I think that's like so important for having ideas and like connecting ideas that you had in the past. And I recently read in my journal from when I was 10 years old, which was really embarrassing to read. But the one of the good takeaways was I like listed that my hobby was daydreaming, and I love that because that's like so true today. And I think a lot of what I'm doing when I'm being creative is like having these daydreams about what I would like the world to look like, and then coming up with concepts that have meaning and finding ways to like communicate that concept to an audience.
Alright, so where do creative ideas come from? Like, you all know what you want to see. Even if you don't realize you know what you want to see, you know what you want to see. And sometimes you just need to do it wrong to figure that out. And that's what sketching is for me, is like, occasionally I'll make a sketch and I'll love it. Probably 1 out of like 30. Maybe 1 out of every sketchbook I'll make one that's like, yeah, that did it. And that's kind of what you think would like inform the rest, but it's not. It's when I make the sketch where it's like, that's garbage. Like, this would have looked so much better had I done this. And the only reason you know you don't like it is because you know what you do like. So if you've ever like thought of an idea and you're like, oh, I'm not creative, or like, oh, well, I want to do that, but that's not going to work. That's because deep down you know what would work. And so every time I do something wrong, it gives me a little bit better of a sense of what I would want to do right. And the trick is, I think, is you just got to keep on doing it. And they like talk about that 10,000 hours as if it makes you good. But like what it does is it just gets you really good at being wrong. And then being wrong gets you to where you want to be right. And it's constantly evolving. You'll never really get to where you're right, but eventually if you just get really good at being wrong. And so the hardest part is starting. There's like this Norwegian term called like the doorstep mile. Basically means like, it's got like some, I'll try to pronounce it, but not in front of a camera. But like the hardest part is just getting that first foot over the door. That counts as your first mile. So you can put that on Strava too. But like, it's the same with all these ideas. The first line on a sketchbook is terrifying. I assume the first word on a page is horrifying. First shot of a film is terrifying. Photos, I don't know about that. That's kind of spray and pray for me. Like, get it all. But it's still scary. And so the real trick is just you gotta start and fail and then keep on going. So like, if you have an idea, do it now and get it wrong so that you can know what you want to do right.
I'll keep mine short. I find the storytellers, I am the storyteller myself, but I go to events like this and I connect with people and I'm like, what's that story you want to tell? Like, is there potential? Is there not? Like, here's things to think about. Like, that's where I get psyched. The up and coming storytellers. And so I'm constantly going to events and meeting people and being like, hey, because that's how you find those like crazy characters that you never thought of for those stories. Like, my immediate surroundings are limited, but the world's aren't. So that's how I go. I don't know if there's other questions in the audience. But
We have one more, Vanessa.
Okay, I don't have a question, but I have a thought thinking about how we engage in diverse audiences when we talk about climate advocacy. And something that I have been thinking about a lot this weekend is recognizing that there are different communities that have different access to voting. So I can't vote. Like, I've never been able to vote. I grew up undocumented. I'm an immigrant. I don't have access to voting. It's not easy. And so when I hear narratives of just vote, they feel really exclusionary to my communities. And I just want to create space for that and talk about other ways in which we can engage in climate advocacy, because I am a climate advocate, but I can't vote, right? And so I think, again, like honing in on our personal stories and recognizing they have power. And like, I can't vote, but I can speak to a room of people who can vote, right? And then in that way, hopefully carry that forward.
yeah, that's an excellent point. I think Mario has something.
I can totally relate. I became a U.S. citizen in 2018, and I remember being in the U.S. in 2000, and then back again in 2004, and realizing like I felt so powerless that it's like I don't particularly like Bush, and but it was exactly that. And what I did, when I was in grad school, and I was on election day, I drove from the dorm to the polling booth, to the voting booth, and I went and I knocked on every one of my friends' doors, and I was like, "You're going,
Yeah.
you're going, you're going." And I drove them back and forth all day long. And so I think that there's a lot. I completely relate to what you're saying, and I think that it is important to provide like those options for people who live here, share the values, and want to see democracy progress, but don't have that agency.
I'm so glad you surfaced that, and it'll be in your breakout sessions something to bring up. Are there questions? Are we out of time? Yeah.
I'd never thought of that, and that's just making me think of all those like posts where I just like, go vote.
Yeah, most people
That's
don't
such
think
a good
about it.
point.
I think it's
Yeah.
like, again, like a privilege that people don't see and we take for granted. And I think, yeah, like it's hard for me to be in this space, right, and hear about voting and think about how do I get creative and how do I share this story, because there's millions of us, you know?
When it's you and everyone who's under 18 as well.
That's true.
Like, I hadn't
Yeah.
thought of that. You're totally right.
Yeah.
Like the people that probably feel it like super poignantly.
Yeah.
Just super good point. That's for
Which, like, I'm not saying voting isn't important. I think it makes it even more important, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For sure. Thanks for sharing that. Awesome. All right, cool. Do we have any more questions? We can do a quick lightning round on something if we have anything.
Awesome. So we're gonna do breakout sessions. We're gonna go outside for it. And what I'm kind of trying to leave you guys with is just what you can do to engage your community and followers in the midterm elections, and sort of what part you can play in these larger ideas, and how you can maybe utilize your own story or the stories of the people around you to tell those, or to engage folks in those conversations. So I'm gonna have Brian come up and explain the structure a little more.
Awesome. Can we get a hand for our panel?